My name is Taylor Strauss, and I want to tell you the story about a girl who, like a lot of people, had some big challenges that she had to overcome to find herself and blah, blah, blah. Look, I know it sounds like the typical cliche story, but the story that I'm about to tell you is probably going to be different than any other college transition anecdotes you've heard because, well, you'll see. Oh, and in case you haven't figured it out, that girl is me, and this is my story. This is me. And this is my mom and my dad. I also have one brother who's 16 years old. To me, he's my baby brother, even though he outgrew me recently. We also have 4 bunnies who I'm obsessed with. Seriously, just ask anyone who knows me slightly and they will tell you the same thing. I used to live in Maryland when I was younger, but for most of my life, I've lived in the small town of Sellersville, Pennsylvania. I went to a large high school, and as far as grades went, I did pretty well. I graduated 42nd in my class of around 615, which put me in the top 10%. Overall, my life was pretty good growing up. I was generally happy, although because I lived in such a small town, it was very easy to get bored, and a lot of times I craved change. Well, in the start of 2013, I started to get that change, but it wasn't exactly the change I was expecting or hoping for. My relationship of a year and a half had been falling apart for several months, and finally the first boy I ever fell in love with broke up with me. I cried for months after. It was some of the worst pain I ever felt. Also around that time, I had started to become depressed and also started to develop an eating disorder. Bulimia, to be exact. The breakup intensified both of those things, and before I knew it, I was a very sad, full-blown bulimic who didn't have her typical source of comfort because he had walked out of her life. Needless to say, the rest of senior year was very difficult for me. But things got easier as time went on, and I chose to make another big change in my life by accepting my offer to attend Penn State. Penn State was about 3 hours from my house. And as much as I needed that change, this really worried me because I had weird anxiety issues since I was a child that caused me to get extremely sick to my stomach in a lot of situations. I had never been diagnosed, but all I knew is that it prevented me from participating in sleepovers, from going on non-family vacations, and sometimes even just going out to eat at a local restaurant with a group of friends. Because of this stupid anxiety issue, I missed out on a lot of fun opportunities with friends, and as a result of that, I would often drift from my friends and sometimes lose them altogether. But the big concern here is that if I couldn't even go out to eat back home, how on earth was I expected to live away from home at college? Every night would just be a torturous routine of crying and pain for hours and hours, and that was really something I didn't want to deal with. In fact, it was so bad that I considered going to a branch campus of Penn State that would allow me to commute from home. But I knew that I would have to overcome this and move out eventually, so I knew that something had to be done. Finally, during summer, I was able to visit a psychiatrist. He was irritating and seemed clueless in every way. I'm going to attribute his know-it-all ego to the dozens of framed awards he had hanging all over the walls in his office. But even though I couldn't stand to sit and have him talking at me instead of listening to what I had to say, he got the job done and prescribed me medication. It was like I could finally see the light. Maybe I would be able to go to Penn State and experience college like a normal person. Still, when the end of August came and it was time to start packing, I was still very nervous. I had started taking my medication a few days before, but since I had been holed up in my room putting all of my belongings in cardboard boxes for about a week, I had no idea if they were effective. The last few nights at home were very stressful for me. I would toss and turn at night, unable to sleep because my mind would race with awful thoughts about how horrible college would be for someone like me, and most times, I would just break down and cry because I didn't think I could do it. But whether I liked it or not, August 21st came and it was time to make my way to State College. We packed up the car so high that the trunk looked like it was about to explode. Mind you, we were taking a minivan and had taken out the back seat. What can I say? I've always been one to overpack. A long drive later, I finally pulled up to my new home. My first thought was that I was incredibly alarmed and intimidated by the 10-story brick building that was Tenor Hall. It didn't look very homey or cozy. It wasn't one of those brick buildings you look at and go, wow, that looks beautiful, because the bricks were a smart architectural decision. It was more like, welcome to our version of prison. Cold, unwelcoming bricks are cheaper to construct buildings with, and we want to fit as many students as we can in the minimal amount of square footage possible for cost purposes. Yeah, definitely not comforting for somebody who was already doubting being there. When I first walked into my room, it was scary, but also comforting. Even though it was completely barren because my roommate wouldn't be arriving for a few days, I could see the potential of our dorm already. It reminded me vaguely of a hotel. I've always loved staying in hotel rooms when my family and I went on vacation. I love walking into an untouched hotel room for the first time and exploring its different features. So to calm myself down, I tried to keep reminding myself that staying in a dorm was really no different than staying in a hotel. So for a while, my family helped me unpack, and I was actually really excited. But once we got down to the last few details, it really hit me that I wasn't going to be going back home. I'd never been away from home for more than a week. How was I going to live away from home, and all on my own? I bolted out of the room and broke down. Suddenly, I wasn't so excited anymore. Eventually, my mom came to check on me, and I begged for her to take me home. I could feel my anxiety kicking in, and my stomach was in excruciating pain. At that moment, I thought there was no way I could do this. When it came time for my family to leave a few days later, I was an emotional wreck. I tried to hold back tears until they left, so that they wouldn't see me cry, but I had no such luck. The first few nights in my dorm were awful. It didn't feel like home, and I knew that I couldn't just call my parents to come pick me up and save me from my anxiety attack as I had done so many times before. Things started getting easier a few weeks later. I cried less each passing day, and slowly started to become best friends with the girls who lived next door to me and my roommate. In fact, those girls were the ones who helped me when I relapsed into bulimia because of how scared I was at college. My roommate was from Florida, where Greek life is a huge deal. She convinced me to rush with her, although at first I was a bit skeptical. I mean, when I thought of sororities, I thought of slutty girls who never wore clothes, drank themselves into oblivion, and were even meaner than they were dumb. Of course, this is true of some sorority girls, but overall I learned that this stereotype gets greatly exaggerated by the media. In fact, when I got into my sorority, none of my sisters embodied the typical sorority girl. And maybe that's because we aren't generally known to be a cool sorority here. But I didn't mind because we got along really well, and before I knew it, I felt like I had just gained 150 new friends at this giant school, one of whom happened to be my roommate. They were all so nice to me and have always been willing to lend me a hand when I need it. At this point, I finally felt settled in and was loving my new life and the changes that were occurring and the experiences that I was getting to be a part of. That was until about 6 weeks into school. Looking back now, 6 weeks isn't very long, but for someone who has never been away from her family for more than 1 week, and that was just one time, 6 weeks seemed like an eternity. My roommate went home to celebrate her sister's birthday, and then while I was Skyping my family, I quickly logged off because I knew I was going to burst into tears. I called my mom to tell her that I was really homesick, and we bought bus tickets for me to come home first thing in the morning. The next day was the first time I'd ever traveled on public transportation alone. The ride was miserable because of a long layover. It took me about 6 hours to get home that Saturday, and the worst part was that I had to take another bus back to State College in 24 hours. As expected, I started sobbing when we got near my house because I had the sudden realization that I was actually going home. I cried that entire night, a mix of happiness and sadness. Pure joy to be home, but also sadness that it was so temporary. I even talked to my mom about transferring to that nearby branch campus. But either way, I knew that I wouldn't be able to transfer until the semester was over, and that was still a long way away. That's when we agreed that I would come home every so often until I got comfortable at college. So I did just that, which helped a lot. However, towards the end of the semester, I had a pretty bad breakdown. I honestly don't know what brought it on. All I remember is eyeing up a bottle of prescription sleeping pills, but going to the bathroom to get myself away from them. In the bathroom stall, I just started panicking and clawing at my arms to the point where I even drew a few specks of blood. It wasn't brutal, but it was enough that the marks could be seen for a few days. I decided after that incident that even though my stomach hadn't hurt in a while, my anxiety medication wasn't working, so I went back to that obnoxious psychiatrist over winter break who prescribed me a different type of medication to try. I was actually pretty surprised that he gave me new meds, considering that he kept talking to me in such a condescending way that I almost thought that I had done something wrong. The only catch is that they wouldn't be in for another month or so, which meant I was going to have to be at school without it for a while. I did okay without them, though. Eventually, I got on the medication and have been on it since, and it's been very helpful. As I got more involved with my sorority and made better connections with my hallmates, who pretty much became my roommates, I felt much happier at Penn State and have really grown to love it here. If I'm going to be completely honest, this is the first time I've told this story in one sitting. I guess that's probably because a lot of people can't relate to the extremeness of my anxiety issues. I mean, I've only ever met one other person in my entire life who suffers the same symptoms and triggers as I do. Oh, and she's in my sorority, so I'm really lucky to have her here. In hindsight, when I look at my story, I see someone who overcame anxiety and learned to survive at college. But underneath that surface, I see the story of a girl who overcame so much more than that. My struggles at college forced me to do a lot of things independently that I wouldn't have been able to do if I hadn't adjusted here with the help of my friends. I mean, just think about it. If I had chosen to go to the branch campus, I probably still wouldn't have traveled on my own, gone to the doctor on my own, or do other things that I normally look to my parents to support me with. This one specific change in my life, moving to college, has completely helped me to grow and mature as a person in 1 year more than I have in my entire life. I may have had to overcome a lot more than the average person to get to being as content as I am now, but I'm no longer afraid of new situations. Over spring break, I went home with my roommate to Miami for a week, and I'm even considering studying abroad during the summer. Back in high school, I would not even have humored these ideas. Who knew that one small thing would lead me to so many adventures and opportunities for me to discover myself? Sometimes, the type of change that we get isn't always the type of change that we want, as I learned in high school. But as I learned in college, there is a flip side to that. Sometimes, as difficult as it can be, change is good.